Welcome to my podcast. And today I'm delighted to be sitting here at Highclere Castle with Nick Hopton, who's written a wonderful book about his journey restoring a house in Italy. But it's so much more than that. It's about his family and his own journey in discovering things about himself as he went through the process. It's called Marma Mia, and it's about a little-known part of Italy, which I think you all need to visit. Welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Lady Carnarvon, thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Marvellous. I couldn't put your book down, Nick, actually. And then having read it, I passed it to my husband, to Geordie, and said, "You've got to read it." And then he snagged it, and he has also very much enjoyed it. So that's the first thing, that I want to turn the pages. And I imagine you might have been thinking a little bit about A Year in Provence, which really, I guess, struck gold for Peter Mayle. And all of us authors are thinking about travel books and Peter Mayle. But in a sense, you've also done it, but now with Italy. Had you read A Year in Provence in advance?
First of all, I'm delighted that you enjoyed the book. And thank you for reading That's Well Beyond the Call of Duty. Yes, I hadn't read A Year in Provence until COVID. And at which point I was actually the British ambassador in Libya at that point. And my sister had just given me A Year in Provence. And it's a book I'd always resisted reading for some reason. But then I read it and I couldn't put it down. I was turning the pages and it made me feel so good at what was actually quite a tricky time for everybody. During this long periods of enforced, not idleness so much, we were all locked down. I'd written books before and I thought, okay, maybe this is the time when I write one about our house project in Tuscany. And it came remarkably naturally. And my intention was to write something that, at least like Peter Mayle's book, inspired people to get to know a region they might not know, but above all, made them feel better about things.
I think we all need feel-good books, and this is a feel-good book. But what's interesting to me is it's, in a sense, paired with your own highly successful life as one of our ambassadors and men abroad for the Foreign Office, starting from Cambridge, reading, I know, old languages in French and Italian, and then, of course, being sent, as is the wont of the Foreign Office, to the Middle East. And I assume you then had to learn Arabic. Is that how it went?
Yes, absolutely. I've learned Arabic on and off for almost 4 decades. I joined the Foreign Office with languages, but European languages. And then my first posting was Morocco. And during my time there, I first of all tried to learn the local dialogue, Maghrebi, and found it impossible. It's really a transliterated form of Arabic. It doesn't have structured grammar in the same way as Fusha, a more classical form of Arabic, which I then turned to when I gave up on the Maghrebi. So I learned a bit then, and then I didn't do much with my Arabic for a very long time until after the Arab Spring I was sent to Yemen. And Yemen is a wonderful country, very complicated, difficult country, and it was going through a very turbulent period with the fall of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was the then dictator who fell in the Arab Spring. And it was a wonderful place to learn Arabic because everybody speaks Arabic and they speak a beautiful Arabic. And not many people spoke English or anything else. So I was forced to really get to grips with Arabic at that point. And then I was also able to use and develop my Arabic a bit when I was posted to Qatar later, and then obviously Libya towards the end of my career.
So on top of the Arabic, you also obviously speak French and Italian. Were there any other languages that you added to your stable of languages, or was it just English?
I married someone of Chilean origin, and having visited South America, it wasn't good enough anymore just to slur my bad Italian into Spanish. So I learnt some Spanish along the way, so at least I could find out what people were saying around me when I was visiting Chile. And I have a little bit of German, and when I was posted in Iran, I learnt some Farsi.
Wow. I wonder sometimes if the facility for languages develops as you learn more languages, but I think each language is its own challenge, I would suspect, as well. So but that's very humbling.
Well, there are varying difficulties, I think, languages. And I should add that I don't see myself really as a linguist, which may sound odd because I speak quite a lot of languages. There are people who are natural linguists and very good at grammar and stuff. I'm not one of those. The bit I've always put emphasis on is communicating through often very ungrammatical use of the language. But I think if you're in a place, you owe it to the people you're meeting there to try at least communicate in their language. And normally you get a lot back from doing that. And so people shouldn't be scared that they're not natural linguists. they should feel courageous and just throw yourself into it, because that is the way to learn a language. And it doesn't matter if your grammar's wrong. And my Italian grammar still goes really badly awry after all these decades of speaking it. But the key thing is to try and to speak, and you'll be amazed. We can all speak foreign languages.
We can. I think it's just because of Google. We tend to stay with English. The book begins with your and your wife, who is called La Stupenda, which I love, throughout the book's decision to buy a holiday house in this unusual part of Tuscany. It's not where many English people buy. It's slightly out of the way. It's unspoiled, which immediately appealed to me when I was reading your book. But do you want to share how you began?
So it was very serendipitous, essentially, beginning of our love affair with the Maremma, which is that bit of Tuscany to the west of Chianti, and it stretches nowadays from Lucca down to Roseto and down towards Lazio. And it's a big area. Historically, a very important part of Italy. It had its own empire at one point, almost 3,000 years ago. The Etruscans were a very important cultural pre-Roman empire in that
We have an Etruscan temple here.
Fantastic. There is a synergy building already, isn't it? And I hope it's an original one. I didn't know they got as far as Highclere.
They did indeed. Do you know, in the summer, next autumn, when we have our reading prizes, maybe you should be reading from your book there.
It would seem very
quite
appropriate,
fun, wouldn't
I would
it?
have thought, yeah.
Great. I'm so sorry, Nick. Please
No, it's
carry
all
on.
right. The Etruscan Empire went as far as the Po Valley in the north. Nowadays, normally people talk about Etruria or the Etruscan area as being more limited, as I've described it. But we came across the idea of buying a property in this region in a very serendipitous way. And I try to bring this out at the beginning of the book, because I talk about the clouds dispersing sometimes and suddenly everything becomes clear in a way it might not have been. I'd been wanting to look for a property in Italy for a long time. And with my wife, we'd looked at lots of ideas, but it never ever came together. And an Italian friend of ours, childhood friend of mine, one day just said to me, forget about Chianti. You need to look at the new Chianti, which is the Maremma, and this particular series of 5 hilltop towns, medieval towns, which are in that first range of foothills, 20, 30 minutes from the coast. We somehow, a series of events, and you'd have to read the book to hear those series of events, but I tried to describe the serendipity of it. It seemed to be meant to be. And we ended up, the first house we saw was the one we ended up buying, and all this happened in a very short period of time. And it's been a labour of love at times, real adventure, highs and lows, and I try and capture some of that in the book. The challenges, it's not easy owning a property or developing a property overseas, but the rewards can sometimes be fantastic and wonderful for a family in many ways. I try to capture all of that in the book, and also to bring out, as you say, Fiona, the relationship we have with the region around us, the Maremma, which is not very well known by British people or Americans. It's much more visited by Germans and Swiss, but above all, it's where the Italians go on holiday. The Romans, the Florentines, they go to the Maremma for their holidays. And so it has an extraordinary authenticity and a cultural beauty to it, which in more touristic areas often risks getting lost.
Because I love the way you just lurched into it and went for it, because I just think that's many of the ways that I've approached things in life. And you wonder then what on earth you've done as you then find all the challenges ahead of you. Plus, the other thing I think people would love to read about is all your landscaping challenges, because I also have landscaping challenges here, which involve diggers and Kubotas, and I never knew how much I loved Kubotas until I married my husband. So they're a very important part of life here. And the minute you started writing about that, I got so excited.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I didn't know that I had any landscaping interests in me either until we entered on this project. And since my 40s, I've been interested in gardening. I do recognise I do not have green fingers, and unlike my brother, who can touch a piece of ground and a seed and it suddenly is very prosperous, I can't do anything like that. And actually, I talk about my failures in the growing department in the book. But what I have enjoyed very much is working with a very skillful digger operator, who I call Michelangelo in the book. And he's a great character, and his ability to manipulate a digger shovel and to move things precisely and then to flatten areas, create spaces that never existed before and bring things to life. It's as artistic as someone using a paintbrush.
I thought it was very Jeremy Clarkson. I know. I thought
Who, me or the digger driver?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure who fitted what one, but it was. It just reminded me of all that and that enthusiasm which takes you in there, and then the boo-boos you make when you're busy digging, basically, which is such fun. I wasn't sure whether you were Jeremy Clarkson or Caleb, actually, but Michelangelo was Caleb and you were the Jeremy Clarkson figure.
I fear I was probably more in the Clarkson
and he was more of the
and
Caleb.
He was the more capable one who actually could do that.
That's what I thought when I was reading it, because it's such fun. And I always get carried away here. And then also I have to say, the bills for that part of life here are always astronomical.
Yeah.
And I'm actually a chartered accountant by training, so I have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to hide them in different codes so my husband doesn't come across them too soon or too often, or they're split amongst different other codes, which is also very useful. And then I suddenly find something's become really expensive and I have to figure out a way of getting some more money in to blooming pay for it. But I am obsessed with my Kubotas, landscaping and gardening, so I'm hugely with you on that one. But Italy is very dry, a very different climate to here. And you can have the olives and the wonderful vegetable gardens, etc., which we can't have here. Very different in terms of the flavour of tomatoes.
Oh, and particularly around where we are, in the summer, the tomatoes are to die for. Absolutely extraordinary, and a wide variety of them as well. And in fact, one of our family's favourite dishes is the tricolore, which is with tomatoes and mozzarella di bufala, and obviously basil as well. And the olive oil locally is high quality. Even the meagre quantities we eke out from our trees. The food, the wine around our part of the Maremma, but Italy, as you say, generally, Fiona, fantastic.
And I think it's just the enjoyment of the seasonality and of living locally, of the local wines, the local people, the local flavours, both of what you hear and what is the vernacular. Is the language there a vernacular which is slightly different from the Italian you learnt, or is it?
It's essentially Tuscan, so a very aspirate C sound, which actually verges on the Arabic at times, casa, for casa, meaning house. But it's basically Tuscan. And because it's a very agricultural area, the Maremma these days, we don't have any major cities anywhere near us. The closest being Pisa in the north and then Grosseto in the south. So the people around where we live, they work on the land and they are very genuine, very friendly and supportive of these interlopers. And yes, I enjoy speaking with them, and most of the time I can understand what they're saying, but it is a strong Tuscan accent.
And I loved the story of when your friend from the Ambassador came to stay with you, and suddenly the mayor and everyone turned out as well to say hello. That was just so cute.
We obviously try and keep a very low profile when we're there and just be a normal family, which is one of the great attractions of it. And that was blown a little bit when my friend came up from Rome, and suddenly this armed escort of carabinieri demanded attention. And I went up to meet them at the gates of the city, of the town, because it's a town of 3,000 people where we live. And suddenly find Signor Sindaco, the mayor, and all his entourage around, who obviously felt they needed to come out and greet whoever this was with their carabinieri escort. So that was a different side of it, which we hadn't seen before.
It's such fun, actually. And it's just those colourful moments just made me enjoy the book so much. And do you think you finished all your work at your villa now, or is there the instalment number 2 as you develop and grow more olives or develop your own agricultural produce for your own consumption, I'm sure?
The project goes on, and there's always things to do, work to do. This year we've dug a well. We had to go down 97 metres, which is a heck of a long way to get to the water table. But luckily we've hit a lovely aquifer with beautiful fresh water, which can be used for everything around the house and for drinking. And so the project goes on. There's always new things. On our way here today, my wife and I were talking about we need a new covering for the pergola and things like this. And as you say, none of this stuff is cheap. But so the project goes on. Whether is another book in it, I'm not sure. I have other books I am thinking about, and even some I've started jotting ideas for. So the writing will go on, but whether there's a Marma Mia 2, I suspect not. I think probably what I really wanted to get across in that book. I think what I will write about more, though, probably is the Mediterranean as a whole, not just a specific region. and my various experience of working and traveling around the whole Mediterranean. And recently I've taken on a role creating a new program at the University of Cambridge Centre for Geopolitics, which is looking at the Mediterranean as a whole, not just north bits of it, the European, the Arabic, the Asian edge of it, looking at it as a whole, which I think historically people did, of course. The ancient empires and civilizations were all dealing with the Mediterranean as a whole. These days we tend to segment it, which is probably not that helpful a way to deal with it.
There's a very good book by John Julius Norwich about the Mediterranean, which I'm sure you've read. And he also came here and stayed because his father, Alfred Duff Cooper, used to regularly stay here during the 1930s with Lady Diana Cooper, obviously, and we married. So really colourful characters came here. So that was a joy. So I'd read quite a lot of his books anyway, and it was fun talking to him because he had a much more holistic approach to the whole area and how it started. And I've done some work on the trade routes as well, which are, again, broaden one's view of that particular area of the Mediterranean. And you can look at it from the sea and the surrounding lands rather than the territorial areas that actually, particularly the British, have chopped up into countries.
Yeah, no,
So
we have a
it
lot
was,
of responsibility for that.
We do indeed. So I love his books, and that would be a really interesting way to view it, I'm quite sure, actually.
Yeah. Duff Cooper, of course, was ambassador in Paris straight after the war. I love his diaries. And
His diaries are hilarious. So I've written books myself about the 20s and 30s, and his books about that time give such colour. He was quite a naughty man.
He was
They're
very
really
naughty.
worthwhile reading. And anyway, and then quite a lot of naughty people came and stayed at Highclere, so that's always quite fun. And my eyes were popping out on stilts sometimes, but it was then a joy to welcome his son here,
Yeah.
who is an extraordinary author, was an extraordinary author. Again, with this remarkable perspective, which I think really helps, which is the value of the travel books, such as you've written, and broader history, geographical books as well. How interesting.
I think mixing the travel with the history, with the personalities, trying to bring it all to life and make it a bit more real for people. It's a challenge, but
So
I
can I
enjoy
ask you,
doing that.
did you write in your house in Tuscany?
Yes,
You
yes.
do?
I wrote
Is that a good
quite
place
big
to write?
chunks of this book, Maremma Mia, in the house in Tuscany.
But are you beginning to write your next books where you're next going in the same house, or is that back here? Or?
I will.
You will.
It's a case of when one has time, and as a writer, you must find this too. There's a lot of distractions.
Procrastination.
Yeah, I think one has to be in a rhythm, and actually being in a place which is a bit isolated, a bit more remote, helps. You've then just got to carve out the time and get into a rhythm, which is how I found it works. If I can, I need to write at least a couple of hours a day on a regular basis. Can't just come blitz it in one go. Yeah, I think I will write in the house in Italy, but I don't need to be in one particular place to write. I know some writers go to a retreat or something like that. I remember reading about Zadie Smith. I think that's how she writes. She goes and locks herself away in some house. Somewhere
Probably
in the
because
long
there's
way.
so much distraction that it's quite hard to get your thoughts into one place and stay there, which is possibly what you need, particularly if you're forming more characters. I go to the top floor here, but at the moment it's so damn cold I haven't gone up. And nobody comes and disturbs me because it's too many stairs. But it's the same as you. I think I'd rather be in Italy. I love travelling to Italy. I love the language, the food, the people. And it's a glorious country, and we owe so much to its culture.
Of course, yeah.
And we owe so much to the Romans. So we are.
And the wonderful thing about not just Italy, but actually this Maremma region that I write about in the book, is that there are, although the British don't tend to go there and holiday very much these days, there are a lot of historical links, and particularly during the Napoleonic period, when the British controlled Elba, that which is just off the coast from where we are in central Maremma. But you go back and you can find a lot of links. So the British have been present in the past.
They have. It's amazing where they have travelled. So it is really interesting. And I did look at Elba and thinking, we've got Napoleon's desk here. Perhaps I can show
Wow.
you that.
That's where you should be writing.
I don't think historically England would be very happy with that.
One of the things about the region that isn't very well documented or known, and I had to read original texts in Italian and French to get a lot of the information I needed, is the Principality of Piombino and Lucca, which was a Napoleonic construction created in 1802 and then ruled over by Napoleon's younger sister, Eliza, who was a very colourful, strong character and apparently the closest of all his siblings to Napoleon himself. That history, I try and summarise a little bit and bring it to life. And she was a tragic figure, actually. She died soon after the birth of her fifth son, very soon after Napoleon's fall. But during her short tenure, 10 years or so running this principality, the Princess of Vino and Lucca was a major figure in European politics and security as well.
Amazing. Perhaps I could just dip back to your time in the Foreign Office, which I think is entirely fascinating. It is also not something you can necessarily completely talk about, but of all the different Arabic-speaking countries, was there a favourite you had amongst them, or is that an invidious choice and question to ask?
I'm often asked that question, Fiona, and I always, in a very diplomatic way, duck it, because actually each of the countries I was posted to, and with my family, and nearly all of them, apart from where the actual wars were still happening, where I went on my own, each of them had an extraordinary charm in its own way, and the experience for me was very positive in all of them, to be honest, even in the middle of a civil war in Libya or difficult times in Yemen. I think, looking at my career, as 35 years I was fortunate enough to be a British diplomat. A career highlight, of course, was when I was posted to Iran straight after the nuclear deal in 2015 and reopening the embassy as a British ambassador, having the embassy been closed for 4 years since a mob stormed it.
So can I ask, were you sent to learn Farsi before you went there, or did you learn it when you were there?
I learnt it a little bit intensively before I went, but essentially there. And I wouldn't pretend that my Farsi is of any great shakes by any means, but got to the level where I could communicate. It was learning on the job. And the reason for that was not because the Foreign Office doesn't try and train people up before they go to posts, which they do try, and they get better at it at the moment. I think they're trying, again, to be more prepared. But it was simply because the nuclear deal came not out of the blue, but it suddenly got agreed in 2015. Yeah. And the Foreign Office obviously looked around who could they send when the opportunity to restore full diplomatic relations came from that agreement. And they couldn't find anyone else, so they asked me. And I was very privileged to go to Tehran.
It's an amazing country, Iran. I've read so much about its history and that of Mesopotamia, and Leonard Woolley used to come and stay here, who was one of the leading archaeologists discovering many of the treasures from the past. I'm not sure whether I will yet get to visit there myself, but I think it holds so much fascination for many people. It's been one of the earliest cradles of civilization, and yet is in such a challenging position at the moment, with less kindness and more, obviously, warlike attitudes towards everybody. But I think I will probably only dream of it, sadly.
We live in, as I say, in interesting times, and it's very uncertain what will happen now in Iran. They have a brutal, bloody regime in charge still, but that regime is much weaker than it was, and it may well come to an end sooner than people have predicted. Equally, it's very difficult to say when that will be. In this present round of protests and unrest and killing of protesters may not be the final cut of 1,000 cuts that ends the regime. But I think, Fiona, it is likely that there will be an end to this regime, and it may well come sooner rather than later. And when it does, it is an extraordinary country to visit, as you say, cradle of civilization. So much that we think of as either coming from the Romans or the Arabs actually originally came from Persia. And we have inherited some of those aspects, including gardening, formal gardens, and many other things in the UK as well. So I hope when finally there is a more friendly, more hospitable Iran, which it's possible to visit, you'll be able to get there, because you won't be disappointed.
No, I know I won't be. There are many places I'd like to visit, and at the moment I do them vicariously through reading books from the library. But the library at Highclere is amazing, and in some ways it inspires the book club that we've taken forward every month. And it is such a joy welcoming people. Many of the books are about travel, and the Carnarvon family have loved going to Italy, and at one point had bought a house in Italy, which has since disappeared and is no longer with us. But they loved it, spoke the language. And the fourth Earl of Carnarvon used to translate Latin as he travelled by train into beautiful, proper verse. And I have many of the copies in my own study. It's not what I do on a train, although I do write on a train, but I always think I'm very lacking. So there is a love of Italy, I think, for most English people. And I'm sure that everybody will love your book. And many of the people who listen to this podcast are in America. So it's definitely worthwhile picking up. Good old Amazon will help you out. But Nick, just to end with, we're having a summer dance this year at Highclere. It's the first summer dance that I've ever curated. I think I'm going to have a little bit of reeling because I love Scottish reeling, which might surprise people in it. But if you could take anybody with you, bar your wife, La Stupenda, or she could come as well, who would you ask to accompany you to a dance here?
Obviously, it would be invidious to talk about anyone living or even real in that context, because obviously I'd want to take my wife to your wonderful dance. But you mentioned the library at Highclere, and I found it wonderful to see all those beautiful books. And you mentioned that you have a very early edition of Ariosto. Now, from my study of Italian literature in the past, I would go down that route when I'm choosing my fantasy accompanier to your dance. And I think not a character of Ariosto, but Dante, who is one of my great loves, the poetry of Dante. And he is greatly inspired by one figure who I have inherited a love for, and she's called Beatrice. And she features initially in a book he wrote, a very short book of poems and sonnets called La Vita Nuova, The New Life. And I read that when I was 16, and that inspired in me a love of Italy and wanting to know more. And I then went on to study Italian, partly as a result of that. And I would take Beatrice because the way Dante writes about her, this figure, who we think was a real figure, died too young. Dante's love for her was never requited. She may not even have known about it. And she may even have married someone else. But Dante admired her from afar. He was inspired by her. He wrote about this beautiful young girl he was in love with as a young man. And it kept him going in terms of literary inspiration for the rest of his life. The whole of the Divine Comedy is essentially a love poem to Beatrice. And I, therefore, if I had the chance to meet and take Beatrice to your dance, she would be my guest for the evening.
Thank you very, very much, Nick, indeed. I think we're all going to be going back to just remind ourselves of Dante's poetry, but thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for hosting me.